our pal is?
Minister.
I do not.
Member.
Does the minister know what the CFSC is?
Minister.
I do not, no.
Member.
I'll stipulate, Chair, that is the Canadian firearm safety course that all gun owners in Canada have to do to get their firearms license. Has the minister ever done the Canadian firearm safety course?
The Honourable Minister.
Speaker, it's my third week on the job. No, I have not.
The Honourable Member.
Does the minister know what safety classes and safety demands are expected of law-abiding Canadian gun owners?
The Honourable Minister.
This is not about law-abiding gun owners, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member.
How can the minister make that claim when he doesn't know the basic fundamentals of law-abiding gun ownership in this country, Chair?
To someone like you who actually knows something about firearms, or someone like me who cares about the right to own firearms, we might think that being a know-nothing might disqualify a cabinet minister in charge of firearms, but in the Liberal Party, it's the opposite. The very fact that he doesn't know what an assault rifle is allows him to speak with great confidence, not being worried about getting any facts wrong. And so I think that what you and I and Andrew Lawton might have thought was a foolish and embarrassing clip just showed the brilliance of the Liberal appointment. Maybe I'm being too silly, but what do you think of that?
I would agree, and I think it's also quite concerning because this is obviously a highly technical file. It has a lot of background to it because we had a pretty resilient and complicated system of firearms regulation pre-existing this government. However, what's happened under Trudeau, who most are aware, kind of made edicts and then government had to react to them. And there was no, from what we can tell, no room for government departments to shift on those edicts, no matter how poorly informed they may have been. So we now have a minister who seems to know very little to nothing about the existing firearms laws. And worse still, he doesn't seem to have a staff underneath him that are familiar with how they could possibly consult the minister and provide him with more information to make more informed decisions and policies. Because as we've seen for the last 5 years, they've simply been doing what Justin Trudeau and the PMO kind of ordered through the minister. And moreover, we've had 5 ministers overseeing this in 5 years. So it's not like we've had a nice, long, continuous, consistent, hand on the rudder. It's been person after person after person, and each one has seemingly gotten less capable of getting a handle on this stuff. And the whole time, the programs that Justin Trudeau launched primarily in 2020 have just been expanding and expanding and expanding as effectively what seems to be the bureaucrats are just sort of inflating this stuff more and more and more.
You said a lot of interesting things there. I think one of them is how Justin Trudeau would just govern really by optics first, press release first, policy second. I want to say something really passionate, and then the smart people will figure out how that's supposed to work. And luckily, that meant a lot of things he had schemed up never actually got implemented because it was just about the initial press hype. But I mean, it has been so long in firearms that they are actually doing some terrible things. Let me bring your attention to a recent story written by Tristan Hopper in the National Post. His headline was, "Internal Report Shows Ottawa Doubt Over Budget Gun Buyback Will Ever Work." And let me just read you the first sentence. The Liberal government's plan to, quote, buy back thousands of once legal Canadian firearms is not on schedule and over budget. But a newly released internal report shows that Ottawa is doubtful that it is working as announced. Do you have any update on that? I mean, the idea that they've spent $500 million so far and haven't actually bought back any guns, it feels like the ArriveCan app. Like, it feels as much about a source of fraud or padded budgets as actually a gun project. Maybe everything the Liberals do is just a patronage deal. Today it looks like an ArriveCan app. Tomorrow it looks like a gun buyback. It's all about just lucrative contracts to buddies. I don't know. You tell me what's going on with the gun buyback.
Effectively, going back to what you'd said previously as well, Trudeau had these really impassioned statements he would make, and then, jump how high was sort of the response. For example, in the gun buyback we're discussing now, he made this announcement in the wake of the massacre at Port-au-Prince, and then they consulted with the New Zealand government because obviously Jacinda Ardern had made international headlines for making a very similar pronouncement, and no one seems to have stepped in to tell him that Canada is a very different country from New Zealand. We are not an island nation off the coast of countries that have massive existing gun bans.
Yeah.
We are bolted to the most heavily armed country in the world, and it's not close for second place, where criminals get the primary source of their firearms. So they were embarking on this plan, consulting with the New Zealand police, and it's just been slowly churning forward. So on one hand, they are doing it. They've bought back just over 12,000 firearms from businesses at this point. But it's not getting it's taken 5 years for them to do that. And those are businesses. It's a very small number of the overall firearms they're targeting. It's just sort of crawling towards an eventual failure. And moreover, you have to be careful, because I think the government will frame a lot of this discussion around buyback, and they have in the past, around the getting of guns is the success of this program, instead of looking at, does it have any impact on public safety? And in that regard, since 2015, violence with firearms in Canada has increased relatively steadily. It is about 19% higher today than it was in 2015. And since 2020, when these long guns were banned by Trudeau, it's still continued to increase. So it's not having any impact on public safety, but it is costing phenomenal sums of money. By the end of this year, with the amount of money that the government has dedicated to it and the previous spending, it'll be somewhere around $830 million.
Huh. Now, I just did some quick math. If you say that they've bought back 12,000 weapons, and if we're going to use the $500 million figure, and maybe the figure's bigger now, that works out to about $4,000 per gun. Now, I'm just looking behind you there on the wall are a number of rifles. Are those the kind of guns? And I can't tell. I think there's some rifles there. I don't know if you have a shotgun there. I can't quite tell. I'm not an expert. Spending $4,000 a gun to buy them back, that seems a little stiff. I mean, those firearms behind you, how much would those cost if you went to a store and bought them?
Well, they vary. Probably anywhere between a few $100 to more than I would want to admit to my wife. Yeah. But they've also got $25,000 rifles. They've got rifles that they're paying six figures for. They're very rare African hunting rifles. It's all over the map. And moreover, the amount of money that's been spent, a lot of people are saying, well, that's because of the setup costs and whatnot. For example, they've budgeted $100 million in operating expenses with public safety for this year to oversee phase 2, the component that involves individuals. But last year they budgeted $30 million for businesses. And if they targeted, we bring it back to the 12,000 guns that they bought from businesses, that's actually more guns than they thought they were going to get. They estimated there were only 9,000 guns impacted at businesses. They got 135% compliance, which is obviously impossible. So their estimates on the individual numbers are likely incorrect as well. And they've now recognized that, actually saying that they have a 13-year gap in the data, so it likely isn't accurate. So the numbers that we're talking about already they're going to go up. The amount that's budgeted this year with public safety alone is basically $460 million. That's not going to cover the procedural costs that they're looking at. And again, it's not that this program is going to fail because a lack of compliance or anything else like that. It's going to fail because the people who they are taking guns from are literally the ones who are least likely to use a firearm in the commission of a crime. Licensed gun owners account for like less than 2% of all violent crime involving a firearm. So it's specifically targeting a population of people who aren't contributing to the public safety issue Canada's facing. And Bill Blair even admitted this earlier in the program, where he said, we won't be buying guns from criminals. Unless you have a firearms license, the government isn't going to give you a check for your gun.
The whole thing about these, I think in the States, they use the word a gun amnesty. They don't ask you where you got it from. They just want the gun off the street. If you're literally saying you have to show you have a license to sell to us, by definition, you're not going to get a single illegal gun. By definition, by virtue of the engineering of this plan, you cannot get illegal guns off the streets if you require a license. That seems like the opposite of what they should be doing.